Greetings and welcome to On the Table. We are broadcasting on RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Mohana Priya. On tonight's episode, in the next 30 minutes, we'll be discussing one of the most critical aspects of Budget 2025, taxation. As we approach the new fiscal year, understanding how these tax policies will shape our economy is essential. We welcome to the studio Dr. Virendrajit Singh, Senior Advisor on Tax Policy at KPMG Malaysia. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, Doctor, before we get into the budget proper, let's speak a little bit about Malaysia's tax base. Can you give us an idea as to how narrow or wide it is currently?
Yes, I think the reason why we have fiscal deficits and prolonged fiscal deficits is primarily because of our narrow tax base. When you see a narrow tax base, when you collect tax revenue for a nation, you've got to look at who you're taxing and how much you're taxing, right? So, in the end of the day, it's individuals and businesses,
Correct.
which includes companies. So, the interesting thing about individuals, working individuals, is that last statistics that appeared in the economic report a few years ago says that 15%, only 15%, of our workforce is actually contributing to income taxes, right?
Right.
Now, so that tells you how narrow personal income tax is in terms of coverage. So the rest are all exempt because their income levels are low, right? And that brings to the fore the fact that our average wage levels in Malaysia are generally low. So that explains it. Yeah. But one of the reasons why we've also have got a low tax base for personal income tax purposes for individuals is because over the years, the government has raised the bar. You see, when do you start paying income tax? Right? So now it's almost like, depending on your profile, whether you're married, you have children, you may find that even though you earn 4,000 a month, you may not be taxable because of all the reliefs. Yeah. It used to be much lower. So it's got raised over time. Yeah. And this is where the aspects of politics comes into tax policy, right? So you want to help the people, you increase the threshold, but that means you're making the tax base narrower.
That's right.
The second aspect is about businesses or largely companies. Statistics show that if you're looking at all the registered companies at SSM, this is our registry of companies, last statistics seem to indicate 20% of these registered companies actually are paying taxes.
Is that right?
Yes, but they could also mean for many reasons. A majority of them could be dormant.
Okay.
Yeah? I think many people have a lot of companies that register and then they don't activate it. Yeah. So that's one. Second thing could be that many of them are small and therefore are not yet making profits. So we have to account for that. Yeah. Third one could be that many of them are large, but they enjoy a whole host of tax incentives. Right. And therefore they do not contribute to the income tax revenue. So that tells you, from that analysis, you probably will have a perspective that there are many strategies that one can adopt in terms of trying to widen the tax base. So that's basically why we have a narrow tax base,
right.
And which is why it's always talked about in the budget about
Correct.
how we widen.
About how do we widen? So how do we do it? How can we widen the tax base so that tax revenue can increase?
And that's really the objective of the government the last many years, trying to increase our tax revenue, right? Now, the easiest way to increase is increase your tax rates.
Correct.
But you're then still having the same base. Yeah. Right? But the other way of doing it could be, and this would be unpopular, of course. The question is, because for personal income taxes, because we've raised the threshold at which you will be taxable is now higher. Yeah. If you were to bring it down, that becomes unpopular. right?
Correct.
And so that's a very difficult area for the government to do.
It's a catch-22, isn't it?
Second thing would be you could look at companies and try to remove a number of tax incentives, which is again what the government is starting to do, but in a very, very, very slow, gentle approach. And there are lots of double deductions and special deductions that we give to businesses. And some have been there for 20 years, right? So if you start removing this, you then have a little bit more tax revenue to collect. So that's the other strategy. How do we streamline our tax incentives, remove some of this? Because the issue for tax incentives for corporates is really do we still need it, right? Does that particular sector still need to be incentivized? And I dare say there are many sectors which no longer need to be incentivized. If we've already reached a level where we've got critical mass in terms of players and companies involved in that particular sector, then I think we can start removing the incentives. But the other challenge of incentives, especially of very large companies, is the foreign investors, right? Now, the government has started doing this, that in the sense of foreign investment, we want to focus on certain core areas. And if we just focus on certain core areas that we wish to bring into the country, then you can give certain incentives to attract. But it has to be time-based. And nowadays, the incentives are 5 years, and so on, and sometimes 5 + 5, and so on. So that's the way to do it. But we have been overly generous in the past. We had a long list of products and services that qualifies for incentives. And whether it's domestic investors, whether it's foreign investors. So I think the government is starting, in fact, has been doing this for the past 5 years. We're still waiting for the final output. So what you see in the budget of the past few years is just little bits and pieces coming about what we will do or are in the process of doing. Now they talk about a new investment framework. That was mentioned in the budget as well.
Correct. So, Doctor, what was your impression of an overall perspective of this year's the budget that was just presented last week, Budget 2025?
This is the third budget that our Prime Minister is presenting as well, right? In the end of the day, we must go back and take a step back. The budget is just a one-year plan. So when you talk to people, when you read what's in the media, people are critical sometimes of a particular budget because it doesn't have this, doesn't have that. And in Malaysia, it's a real circus in terms of when budget comes, how everything happens, right?
There's usually excitement about handouts.
That's it. So we are probably one of the few countries where there's so much excitement. In many other countries, this is just a routine thing. Because we've built up the interest or awareness, or rather drawn attention to people that there will be lots of help coming along. So this subsidization mentality is very strong in Malaysia. And so we're always looking for something for us. Though my own impression of this is just a one-year plan. It is more of the same. It is similar to the past few budgets, a little bit here and there, and putting some icing on the cake, trying to attract, trying to incentivize here and there certain sectors. So it is a mild budget, in my opinion.
Why, Doctor, do you think a one-year plan is not good enough? Do you think we need a 5-year plan, or should there be a roadmap to ensure some kind of tax sustainability?
The bigger roadmap that we have is a 5-year plans, right? And those plans are the ones that we should pay more attention to. A lot more debate needs to be done. But unfortunately, when you look at the 5-year plans and focusing only on taxation, you do not find in that 5-year plan too much of a focus on taxation. They do talk about tax revenue will increase this by a certain percent, but how? It's not clearly specified. And part of the reason also is because two reasons. One, maybe we're not sure how we're going to raise that. We just set targets and let's hope for the best. Or secondly, we don't want to share what we are thinking. And this is where I think, to be fair, the civil service, the Ministry of Finance does a lot of work in this area.
Yeah.
They rely on international reports and look at what's happening in the area. There are lots of things you could do, but I think the fear we have is that civil servants keep it to themselves. They don't wish to share too much, politicians as well, don't wish to share too much because they are worried about criticism. But issue of a plan is just certain milestones you set. Whether you will implement it, depends on feedback, right? So you're not saying that a 5-year plan and whatever we are thinking about is set in stone, right? So to me, it's more about consultation and have a consultative approach to this, and that is the way to look at it. That's why a 1-year plan is meant to be part of that 5-year plan, right? So the 5-year plan with the overarching policies and strategies, and then you're looking at measures to try to ensure that we are in line with achieving the 5-year plan. So that's what the 1-year budget is all about. And so that's why the overly excited public every time when budget comes in, but they're not so excited when the 5-year plan comes in.
That's right.
Because it's usually short on details.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a 5-year plan or even a longer timeline. From a tax perspective, I have been an advocate of urging the Ministry of Finance that if you do have a tax agenda in mind, remember we are trying to increase our revenue. We're also trying to increase our tax revenue to GDP ratio, which is every time we have the budget, every time we are saying we're the lowest in the region. So the issue there, therefore, is put out some proposals, put out some long-term plans, some possible milestones, open up for discussion, and then slowly plot the way forward. And I think that's good. That's what it is. But I must be very fair to the Ministry of Finance here. They do have consultation, but their consultation is only for that particular budget.
Okay.
Right? So they have, now you find that in this particular budget, actually this particular budget was rather short on details. A number of tax things were mentioned, but the timeline is in May next year or middle of next year. Why? Because they've decided to have more consultation. So that's why, if you look at it, we haven't yet conclusively arrived at a particular target. The budget puts in some thoughts and then wants to consult.
Are you also referring to the subsidy rationalization on RON 95 and what has been on the possibility of the reintroduction of GST? Is that still in the picture?
Well, yeah, it is. But let me come to the subsidy rationalization shortly. But before that is some of the tax measures. For example, sales tax, service tax is to be widened. But the proposal is meant to be 1st of May. But so in the meantime, they will be consulting. And I think that's also, on hindsight, good. But, really, you need to have done all this earlier so that you can announce that 1st January, this is on. Right? Because when it's 1st May, you lose out revenue collection for 4 months. You're looking at that. So, again, it helps in your budgeting. So I think from a tax perspective, a number of changes, even the new investment plan. It's also work in progress. So businesses want certainty. And this is a simple fact in terms of tax policy.
Because it's stability.
If you don't have clarity and certainty quick enough, you then have businesses stepping back and not wanting to take notice, not wanting to invest, and just business as usual. So these are the challenges we have. And I know Ministry of Finance grapples with all this. And I realize they have issues, but anyway, coming back to the subsidy rationalization. Subsidy rationalization is a whole minefield of issues, right? Because there's so many ways of trying to rationalize this. What is the right approach? And I think the government is still not very clear or certain on how they're going to do this. Many ways have been touted. For example, now they're talking about T15. And the T15 and the rest, the 85%, will continue to enjoy the subsidies. I don't know how the T15 came about. We used to talk about T20,
Yes.
M40,
Yes.
B40.
So there's a lot of talk about the T15
Yes.
not being clearly defined.
Yes, correct. So definitions of subsidy rationalization, who is going to be hit by it. In the past, it was talked about as the car that you drive, the make or the model. Someone can argue that I inherited that. I didn't buy this. So,
That's right.
So are you going to say I'm a T15, right?
Yeah.
So these are challenges. Now they're talking about household incomes. Household incomes, if you read about the comments, people say household means not one individual. It means your husband, wife, maybe even the children who are working but staying with you.
That's right.
So that household income added together pushes people into the so-called T20, T15. But if they're individuals alone,
Yeah.
they could be M40.
Yeah.
So how do you manage this? So I think the rationalization process, as we have seen to the diesel subsidy rationalization process, there was a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
So I think the government is very cautious.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right approach to do, but it has to be done. And my suggestion is strive floating the petrol price first. I mean, you don't float it to immediate market values. Increase it by a short amount, 50 cents or whatever for a period, and then another 50 cents and so on. And that will be one of the better ways of doing it. And then if the people who need assistance, you need to have a database, and I think the PADU database is being mentioned. And to be fair, I think the database is still work in progress.
That's right.
Once you have that, you have the people who need assistance,
Yeah.
and you need to give that assistance.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying this by using the analogy of tax policy. In taxation nowadays, in the past, it was all about having different rates for different people.
That's right.
So if your ability to pay is high, you can pay a higher rate. For those who have less ability, pay a lower rate. But now the philosophy in tax, especially in things like GST or VAT, is coming out in the academic world, and the IMF, World Bank, is apply a flat rate, and then give assistance by transfer payments to the relevant people who need that assistance. So that is actually what I think is the right approach. You do not create too many levels and rates to help people. You impose, so that's what I'm saying is market rate for petrol, maybe not all the way, but float it up, but assist the others through a fleet card or whatever. But you got to identify the right people, because Malaysians are very innovative.
Yeah.
Many people will say, "I'm M40," when in the past he was a very senior executive in a corporate world.
Correct.
So some people tell me they've retired now.
Yeah.
So how do I move to a M40 when these were actually big
That's
corporate
right.
players? So
That's right.
interesting. So yes, subsidy rationalization is a difficult one.
Yeah, it is.
Politically a hot potato.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, Doctor, before we move to the break, I do have one question. Now, the PM proposed a 2% tax on dividend income exceeding 100,000 ringgit. Were you surprised by this?
I was, and I was surprised because I was one of many who had suggested to the government years ago of moving to a single tier system, because our dividends are now for people who receive dividends. You're an investor, you're actually exempt. And because dividends come out of profits are taxable on the company.
Okay.
And therefore, at the end of the day, when these are distributed to you, some arguments are it shouldn't be taxed again. So the government took on that approach. Singapore was one of the first to introduce a single-tier system.
Yeah.
So I was an advocate of that, and after a number of years, finally the Ministry of Finance accepted it and introduced it. But now when you start imposing a dividend tax, you're now going backwards.
Okay.
Because the philosophy was dividends are exempt from tax on the recipients, and now you're saying, I want to impose a 2% tax on certain recipients. So it's some more things to talk about in terms of this, but there are practical issues of implementing this.
Right.
Because, like I said, if you say, I tax at 2%, all the dividends received, it's so much easier to implement.
Yeah.
If you say it's above 100,000,
That's a little
then
tricky,
you
isn't
could
it?
identify, right?
Yeah.
And of course, in personal tax, you and I file tax returns, so we then have to work it out. Anything above 100,000, we report that amount. But remember, there is also many exemptions.
Yeah.
You take out the EPF dividends from unit trusts, dividends from various things. And worse still, dividends that are being paid by companies enjoying exemption, like pioneer status, is also to be excluded.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for someone to manage this. So if you leave these things in the hands of individuals assessing their filling in their personal tax returns, you're going to have a lot of errors.
Yes.
So there must be a way that the government can get this data and do it. So how do you make it easier? The easiest way is tax 2% on all dividends. Is so much easier.
Yeah.
And after all, it's a 2%, by the way.
Correct.
If you are in the 20% tax bracket, let's say, after you add in your earnings, all your remuneration, and then you 20%, if they are asking you to pay dividends also included in and you pay 20%, you feel the pain. But this is not. This is a separate calculation, and just say 2%. I think people will be unhappy, but it'll be easier to implement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Doctor. So we do have more questions, lots to discuss, but we'll take a short break.
Sure.
And we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away. Welcome back. Now we are speaking to Dr. Virendra Singh, Senior Advisor on Tax Policy from KPMG Malaysia on Budget 2025. Now, Doctor, let's continue our discussion. What do you think about the e-invoicing in terms of impact, challenges, and the final outcome?
Yes, just going on from what I just said earlier, e-invoicing was introduced, again, created a lot of uproar among the players, because of some lack of uncertainty and so on. But at the end of the day, the issues about e-invoicing is people are worried about how much of IT costs I got to incur, information technology, do I got to do something to my systems and all that. And yes, the bigger companies had to incur quite a bit because, the IT world is a whole complex mess
it is.
Of issues. So the smaller ones will not have that much problems because the Inland Revenue Board actually, I think, is doing a good job coming out with FAQs and also coming out later with more tools. And they, in fact, ultimately will come out with a mobile tool that will enable small players to issue invoices. So we've got to wait for that to happen because right now e-invoicing is only for the big players.
That's right.
And I think most of them are on board and they have done it. Next stage is those who are 100 million and below in terms of turnover. And then after that, by July 2025, you want to bring everyone in. But remember one thing, due to political pressure, small players have been excluded. Those who make 150,000 and below are excluded. That itself is, I think, a mistake. You can exclude them, but perhaps within a year or two, maybe not a year, but maybe in 2026, you need to bring them back. Why? Because e-invoicing, to me, is a game changer in terms of our tax administration. You see, everything is about data.
Yes.
And the e-invoicing is about collecting data on the invoices everyone issues.
Correct.
And that then tells the Inland Revenue total revenue that is generated by a particular entity in terms of total invoices for a calendar year, let's say.
Yeah.
And someone's invoice is another person's purchase. So this gives information to the Inland Revenue on purchases and sales, and that helps them in their audits. Now, ultimately, you will find if everyone is on board, you will then force the smaller players, the underground economy, those small, we call them small SMEs, but they may not be, SMEs, by the way, the definition is very wide. Mm-hmm. So there could be many who have not been paying income tax in the past, and therefore by making it mandatory in due course, everyone will be in the net. Mm-hmm. And that means
you're preventing leakages.
Exactly, we're helping out in terms of leakages, and therefore you're widening the tax base.
Correct.
By bringing everybody into the net. And so I certainly think e-invoicing has its challenges in terms of cost. It is incumbent on the revenue authorities, the government, to make it easier. Mm. And I think they are working on that. Like I said, a mobile tool may be given for the small players. Mm-hmm. For information, you look at all our street traders and so on. Some of them are already using QR codes, touch and go wallets. They can do all that. Then what's the problem with issuing e-invoicing if you make it easy and through a mobile? So I think it can be done. Yeah. It's always about mindset and how everything new will be given a pushback. So never mind. So Doctor, we can manage it.
We only have about 3 minutes left. So I do want to ask you, what do you think could have been suggested in the 2025 budget but didn't happen?
Yeah, I think what could have been suggested was actually a broad-based revamp of the tax policy and putting out a much more structured approach. Okay. And that didn't come. Okay. When you introduce a 2% dividend tax, you say, I widen the sales tax a little bit, I'll do a little bit. These are all little ad hoc measures. Mm-hmm. It doesn't give a feel that you have everything under control, that you have a long-term view. So I also don't think the budget should be one where we look at incentives for everybody. Mm-hmm. The government's objective in a budget is to place direction for the economy. So they need to perhaps encourage investment in the right sectors and drive the economy forward. So to me, from a tax perspective, it would have been much better if they had set out a longer-term framework in terms of how the tax structure is going, because next year you'll have everybody worried about what new tax will come out. That's right. And that shouldn't be the way. Yeah. We have enough taxes. Yeah. Let's work within these taxes and not introduce new ones. Okay. So this is where I thought the budget may have, it sounds like it is scraping the barrel and searching for little nuggets which may produce a small amount of revenue. Okay. And which is why the dividend 2% tax is not going to generate substantial amounts. But the challenge for me is that I also did not see in the budget clear management of operating expenditure of the government. Right. In fact, it's going up. Every year it goes up, and then we struggle to increase revenue. So we're always doing this game, when actually I think there can be a lot more savings in the civil service, in operating expenditure. That's another way of managing budgets. Okay. Bring down expenditure, increase revenue, you could solve your deficit problems faster. All right. Yeah.
Dr. Virendrajit, thank you so much for your insights and all that you've shared today. I think many more discussions to come on this.
Happy to assist,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's about all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. We've been talking to Dr. Virendrajit Singh, Senior Advisor on Tax Policy, KPMG, Malaysia. A repeat of this episode's broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both the RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, which is also live streaming on YouTube. Till next Thursday, where we'll discuss another topic of interest, I'm Mohana Priya signing off. Good night.